Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for waiting. Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our series of seminars, which is like last seminar of this series. And we welcome all of you to a series of seminars by refugees and strengthening refugee-led humanitarian response during COVID-19 by Global Refugee-led Network and Refugees Study Center. And it's a quiet journey. Like today we have our last session and it is so amazing. We already had a seminar before, and today we're going to have a seminar discussion about affecting change within refugee in the international humanitarian organizations. And I'm really looking forward for this discussion again today, because where pandemic showed us this is toughest time of history of human being, but it also giving us an opportunity how we can think about and change. And this state should be start within, from ourselves, from our organization, and how we can create a good normal and how we can imagine our future. So thank you so much for joining us, and over to you. And just
Yeah, sure. So thanks. Just some of the regular housekeeping notes for the night, and then a couple of messages about next steps that we're thinking about, so that everybody is in the know. Per usual, we are going to be running this seminar for about 90 minutes. The first 45 minutes are going to be dedicated to a conversation with the three speakers who will introduce themselves in just a minute. And after that, we're going to have Q&A and comments. So anyone that would like to participate in that, you're welcome to insert your questions or comments in the chat box. If you follow the button at the bottom of the screen, you can click on the chat button. And then please, we ask you, and we'll probably ask you a couple of times throughout, if you can go to the blue bar on the right-hand screen where the chat bar comes up, and then move it down to select all panelists and attendees. That will enable everybody that's present right now and for the rest of the seminar to see whatever it is that you have to share. There are many people in attendance tonight, and many who have registered for the seminar by and large. There are about 800 people, of whom 650 have suggested that they would like to be part of a By Refugees network moving forward. So we're currently at the RSC and with GRN trying to figure out what the appropriate next steps are for that, deciding on the right platform or network through which we can keep everybody connected. In the short term, we are going to be circulating the list of attendees with those who have consented and agreed to it. And then some additional points just to say that we're also asking for feedback in the seminar series at large. So Alia, whose name shows up as RSC Moderator 1, has posted at the very top a link that you can follow to go to the public feedback form. And we've made it so that all of the responses can be seen by everybody that has access to it. It's not just a tool for us to learn, but for others who may be convening conferences or other events in the future that might want to learn from what others perceive to have been successful elements of the By Refugees series. Another point to say that all of these seminars in the series, the 6 that have been convened so far, including tonight's, will be transformed into different media outputs. And the sort of leading contenders or next steps that we see immediately in the future is that the Journal of Refugee Studies has proposed a short series of papers that can be published in a special issue. So different contributors to the series will have the ability to basically transform the thoughts shared here into a written format that will then be peer reviewed by academics and will be published hopefully in sometime in the next year. Are there any other comments, Alex, about next steps before we get going into the seminar itself?
I think the only other thing as a way of participating is we've set up a blog on the Refugee Studies Centre website. And one of the purposes of that is to have reflections related to this series. So that's not just from the panelists for the seminars, who of course are warmly invited to contribute reflections and thoughts, but it's also for any of you listening at home. If you'd like to contribute to the RSC blog with reflections on By Refugees and the relationship to refugee-led responses, particularly in the context of the pandemic, we've got a forum and a space for that. But what we're really trying to do is ensure that this is just a start, that we continue the dialogue and the conversation. And to everybody that signed up to the email list, you will have already received or receive shortly an email with the link to the feedback form and with some of these ideas for next steps. So we really hope that we'll be able to continue with this and that we can engage you in different ways.
Brilliant, thanks for that. And thanks to all the speakers that are here tonight. Let us begin with an introduction from the three of you, and also to note that there will be a fourth person that is going to appear via recording that we'll introduce as well later in the seminar series. So to begin with, let's get introductions from Bahati, then Joelle, then from Foni. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you're well. I'm happy to be one of your panelists for today, just to close this series of seminars. My name is Behati Ernestine. I currently live in Kenya, but I am originally from Rwanda. I am a trained nurse, and currently I am serving as a UN volunteer with the UNHCR. My role currently at the UNHCR, I am in charge of youth activities. So basically anything in the refugee community that has to do with the youth, whether it is a project we're implementing, whether it is assessing the situation of the youth in the community, I am in charge of that. And it's something that I really love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bahati, for your introduction. And I'm so also pleased to be here today, and it's my pleasure to be one of the panelists. My name is Joelle Hangi from the Republic Democratic of Congo, and currently based here in Kenya as a refugee, and an intern with UNHCR, focusing on communicating with community with innovation services here in Nairobi. And I also support the service in different capacities, such as I help the team to document, to develop some documents and tools that UNHCR and other agencies can use to communicate with people of concern while taking, considering diversity. I also test some of the tools that the team has developed, focusing on communicating with community, and make sure that it's reach UNHCR standard. And I also do that based on my personal opinion and experience as well. And this is all about, after all, I also identify some of the shortcomings of the tools and provide recommendation that can be made to make, to make those tools more effective. And I also broadly share with the team different experiences from the ground to consider while working on various tools and that can make, UNHCR and other agencies to, communicate with refugees community in a more successful way. And lastly, after the Global Refugee Forum, which took place in December, it was a good opportunity for me to amplify refugees' voice and become a refugee co-sponsor, focusing on energy and connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Foni Joyce, originally from South Sudan, but now living in Nairobi. Apologies if my voice keeps on fluctuating. I have some bad cold and it's raining in Nairobi. I'm the co-chair to the UNHCR Global Youth Advisory Council. I've been a co-chair for about 3 years, actually an outgoing co-chair. And I think it's a pleasure for us to really be part of this discussion, to really talk about how we're affecting change from within. My role as a co-chair has really been to support the different entities we work with. We work with refugees from different parts of the world. These are like young people who are refugees, really by providing them support, ensuring that we come up with strategies, that we come up with advices or recommendations that are based from our personal experiences. Our work has really been at the global level, really trying to affect change from within, starting from the local level and transcending to the global level. One of the things that we really work around is, we call it the 7 core actions for refugee that really guide the work that refugees are doing. what states should do with refugees, and also how UNHCR can work with refugees. So that has been one of our key frameworks of working within UNHCR, to see ensuring that we have an inside perspective, but also when we have an outside perspective, it's based on our experiences and also from our community. And I think this is a very good conversation that we're happy, and as Bahati and Joelle have mentioned, we're keen to really take part in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. I think one of the things that's really remarkable about the conversation we're about to have is I don't remember a discussion anywhere that's really reflected on what it is for people of a refugee background to work within international organizations like UNHCR. And all of you in different ways work with, in a very close way, or for an international organization, in this case, UNHCR. And I think what would be really interesting to explore first is how you've come to work for that international organization. What particularly was it within your own background and in your story that made that possible? What do you see in terms of your qualifications or your achievements that led to that opportunity? How much of it needed an opportunity or luck or circumstance, and how much of it was open to you? What barriers did you encounter to be in that position? So I think just to hear it from each of you, a bit about your story and your background would be really insightful to know how you come to be in the roles that you're in. And perhaps, Bahati, we could start with you. You've got a nursing background that you highlighted. You're working actively with youth, and you're a youth activities coordinator. Could you tell us a bit how you came to play that role within the organization?
Sure, thanks, Alex. Well, just to take it a little back, I grew up in Kenya, so basically most of my education has been here in Kenya. And for as long as I can remember, my father was very focused on us getting an education, despite the challenges of being refugees. We basically, my siblings and I, gone through sponsorships all through from the time we came here up to my university. So I was a very focused student. My dad drilled it into my head that, you know, war happened, we don't have anything, but I have the education that I got, and I want the same for you. So I was focused in school. I went through primary school, went through secondary school, and by the time I was finishing high school, I knew that I wanted to get into the medical field. And I say this a lot because I recognize why I chose that field. Because being a refugee, war and the situation of refugees is such a strong reality to me that I've always wanted a skill that can be applicable in any situation, a skill that I can use anywhere, no matter what. So that's why I ended up going into nursing. And I got a scholarship for my degree through the Duffy scholarship. And I went to uni, I studied nursing, and I graduated last year. But when I joined university, I had always wanted to travel, yeah? And being a refugee in, you know, in a foreign land, in terms of documentation, I've always felt like I'm trapped because you don't have a passport, you can't travel. So when I started uni, I remember I wanted to join every club. I wanted to join every group so that I could grow myself outside of, you know, the academics. And one of the few groups I joined was Medical Students for Social Responsibility and International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. You know, all of these are peace activism and also youth-led organization, something I was interested in. And I also joined an organization called Beyond Sciences Initiative, which was youth doing more than just studying, which was something I wanted to grow into. So I joined this, and we could get opportunities through the projects we would run to travel abroad, enter into contests, And I remember I told one of my friends, I wish I could travel like you guys do for conferences, to speak more about refugees, to tell the world about refugees, but I feel trapped because I'm a refugee. And I entered a contest at some point. It was an essay contest. And I remember writing about the challenge refugees face integrating in the countries of asylum because of language barriers. And I won the contest, and the winnings were a trip to the United Nations in New York, but I didn't have documents. And I remember going through the applications. My travel document came through on the weekend the conference was happening. I was so crushed. But these are experiences that I grew from. And from these small groups that I joined, I got to lead projects that opened up my university and my friends to refugees. I realized that most of my friends had never met a refugee. I was the first refugee they would meet. And because of this, we ended up starting a project that is a mentorship project where a group of my friends within the clubs I was involved with, we would go to a refugee camp here in Kenya. We would visit a secondary school for like 3 days. And the team would, because it was a medical students team, so we would have talks on several topics of concern, especially in the camp situation, but they also got the opportunity to interact on a one-on-one basis with refugee students. And seeing this project run year after year, I saw tremendous growth and interest in my peers in terms of refugee issues. When a controversial issue would come up in media about refugees, they would speak from a point of knowing because they had interacted from refugees. They were not just squatters at a corner of the country that they knew nothing about. So years of interacting with refugee youth and host community youth, running projects, dealing with teams, organizing, fundraising, and all that. When the opportunity, this piloting opportunity with the UNV, where they offered a position to a refugee, and that they were very specific that this UNV position was for a refugee, a documented refugee, which was surprising to me because Foni will tell you we go way back, and this is something we had been advocating for everywhere we go. We would be like, you want refugees to go to school, we get scholarships, but then where do we work? Who will employ us? For so long, no one has been willing to employ refugees. And so UNV opening up this position for refugees specifically was a great win, was a great step towards international NGOs opening their doors to refugees. And it helped that I had prior experience running projects, implementing projects. In a way, I had been preparing myself for this position without knowing. So that's how I ended up here.
Thank you, Bahati. That's such an inspiring story to hear that the work you did created the UNV opportunity for you and other people, and that what may not have made sense as you were going through it added up to tell a story at the end, and all of the skills you've developed you can use in your current role. Joelle, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how you've come to be in your role at the UNHCR regional office in Nairobi in innovation services. How did you come to be working as an intern with UNHCR, and why innovation services? How did that come about?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for that question. It's, this is all about giving us an opportunity to share our stories, our real stories, and our journey to, the level where we are today. And for me, as I said, I'm from the Republic Democratic of Congo, and I grew up there. So I came when I was around 20. So you can imagine all the type of challenges that someone who grew up in a French country and a different system and finding himself or herself in a refugee camp where everything seems to be new and with new people and the system is totally different with so many barriers. It was really challenging on my side. So it was a stressful journey, let me say that, and a painful one, because when you're trying to look at the future, you don't see anything in the future. You don't even have someone to, to hold your hand and say, you can make it, because, everyone who is surrounding who is just around you, someone who is, there are people who are really desperate. And I remember when I arrived in Kakuma in 2014, the first time when I saw the place and the camp, I started, crying, because I was like, that's what we call hell, you don't see anything good coming from that place. And that was my situation. And it was really challenging for me, first of all, to know how to, to address, how to talk to other people, because it was really difficult even to go and ask for assistance in different organizations and express myself, because I was not able even to speak in English. I just knew French, and it was really stressful on my hand. But I started learning French in a way that you can't believe. Just friends coming at my place and teaching A, B, C, like from the ground. You're like, what is going on? The basic things. And I was really, trying to encourage myself from the fact that I knew that the easiest way to, to get your own freedom is to build it with your own hand. And I looked at myself and see, I didn't have so many things with me at that time, apart from little background that I had at that time. So I had to document myself and try to make sure that I can be able to integrate myself into this new system so that I can catch up with life and continue. And that's from there, I started now doing some kind of studies. And first of all, I got my first scholarship with Jesuit Worldwide Learning, which was a diploma program for 3 years. I did that, and it was not an easy journey, but I've managed to finish the program. And I started immediately with Southern New Hampshire University, and I'm currently pursuing my bachelor degree of art in business communication at that university. And now participating in internship was part of my, my academic requirement. And that was not an easy process to me, to be honest, due to some of the realities that as young refugees, we normally face when it comes to job opportunity and employment. And this is part due to the work restriction and limited freedom of movements that we are facing, going out or inside the camp. It's really stressful for us who are based in camp settings. And I remember some of my colleagues actually just ended up doing their internship in small kiosks within refugee camps, others even in church. So you can imagine in settings that you can't even get, work experience that are relevant to what you're doing, but they didn't have choice that rather than, just doing it for the purpose of continuing with your own studies and see if you can, you can get to a certain level. And for me, it was really discouraging. Imagine someone who is doing public relations and ended up doing, for example, his internship in a church. So it's something that doesn't even tally at some point, but that is the reality that we are facing as young refugees. So for me, I remember the first time when I knew about this opportunity from a friend of mine who just got an email from a UNHCR staff, and he just shared with me that email and told me, like, you can share with other refugees and see if they can be interested in that position. So for many of the opportunities that I applied to, I was rejected several times, and in different organizations. And I remember even in the office where I am today, I applied for another position previously in private sector partnership, and I was not selected. It was really, disappointing, because I couldn't believe, like, with UNHCR again, you are rejected. So when this opportunity came, I was not ready to apply, to be honest, and I refused. I was like, I think this can't work at all. But some of my friends just encouraged me and told me, like, you can do it. Just try. Just send your application. And I sent that application, and I was really surprised when I was called. It was, I don't know, I can remember it was on Thursday at around 7. I was called, and I was told that I was selected and to going for oral and a written interview. I couldn't believe, first of all, because I was like, I was not concentrating that much on that, because I was like, the result will be the same. I'm used to rejection. I'm used to be told that I'm not qualified. Maybe I have to accept the reality that I'm not qualified. And when I was called, the first thing that I told that person, I remember, and I always told that person, because, when we met now in the office, I told that person, when you called me at first place, I was like, you just dialed the wrong number, because I don't think if I'm that person you are looking for. And she insisted. She told me, like, yeah, are you sure, Hangi? I said, yeah, I'm the one, but I don't think if you just called me for that, for the position I applied to. So they told me, like, I was selected. And I remember also that, the application process was not easy on my hand, due to the fact that, in camp settings, we don't have power. We don't have internet, which is a little bit stable. So I remember I was really going up and down and tried to figure out how to manage the situation, as I had to do the written and oral interviews online. So I really recognize the support that I got from the Kakuma team. They gave me access to UNHCR compound, and it's a miracle somehow to get into that compound. But they gave me that access and told me, you can just go and do your interviews. And I did that interview, and I was called and I was told I was selected for that position. And for me, it was like a dream which just came true. And I was like, it was a way of telling people, not just by word of mouth, that it's possible to change everything that you can see, the current situation. It's possible through practical way, not just by word of mouth, not just by telling them experiences, past experience. I'm here, I'm now working with UNHCR at the regional office, and it's something that people maybe couldn't believe or think about one day if it could be possible, but it's possible. And that's how I ended up being here where I am today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an amazing story of hard work and perseverance. And what's really striking for me is you saying that when you arrived in Kakuma age 20, you were from a Francophone background and didn't speak very much English. And I heard you speak in Oxford just a few months ago and thought, wow, she's a brilliant communicator and a brilliant speaker. And now I think about that not being a language you had until after the age of 20, it's even more remarkable. So thank you for sharing that. Foni, please could you tell us a bit about how you've come to be co-chair of the UNHCR Youth Advisory Council? What was it that led you from your background to be in that particular position?
Thank you very much. I had Bahati and Joelle speaking, and the whole time I was like, this is an experience that I think I have experienced, that many other refugees have also experienced it. And I think when I look back on how far I've come, honestly speaking, I can say it has taken a lot of sweat, a lot of long nights, and a lot of dedication. And I think for me, really, it started when immediately when I completed my high school. I wasn't sure about what I wanted to do in terms of refugee or in this particular country. and you definitely know you want to continue with your education, but you don't know how you want to do it. And for me, that's when I got into an apprentice program. So like I would work and then save half the money because I knew I wanted to go to university. Why I wanted to go to university was because of the experiences that I'd grown up seeing, how refugees were being treated. I think at a very early age, I realized that I was a refugee, and this was solely because we would go to school, and as we were going to school, we would be bullied quite a lot because I think people are aware how South Sudanese look like. And every single time we would go to school, we would get bullied over that. And I think for me, that was a point of like, why would you want to bully someone because they're not from the country? And when the Duffy scholarship was advertised, I think that was a point for me that I knew that I have to take this opportunity up. I don't know whether I'll get it or not, but once I took that particular opportunity, it propelled me to where I am today. Because as much as it took a lot of sweat, a lot of struggle from my parents, this was an opportunity for me to really to forge ahead, not only thinking in terms of my achievement, but also how can I help other young people. And I remember vividly how I got involved in advocacy at the global level and also at the national level, was that we had a sit down and we were having a discussion around issues that are affecting young women. And the more we talked about these issues, the more I could relate with them, the more I could see that as a displaced person, these are some of the things that people face every day. And that for me was a moment I decided, you know what? I'm going to take this. I'm going to become a communication officer and I'm going to communicate. I'm going to use the voice I have to speak about issues that are affecting my community, issues that I'm facing personally, and issues that my family has also faced. Because I think for me, that was the moment I realized that I can communicate. I can learn how to communicate very effectively and make sure that all these things are passed across in a very good way. And I worked on that, worked on it. I was on a lot of, like as a refugee, sometimes you don't have opportunities, but then whenever any opportunity avails itself, you take advantage of it. Because I think I was on a lot of working groups that I can attest to. I was on these working groups to learn from it, at the same time to also kind of like gain experience, because I really wanted to gain the tangible skills that I would later use on the different work I'm doing. So I was in a lot of working groups, a lot of meetings would be hosted, and I would definitely take up this opportunity because I knew that I really want to I really want to take part in this particular event. I want to learn this new skill. I want to see how people work so that I can also rate myself and ask myself questions such as, why can you not do it? Because I think that was very important for me. I wanted to find out, why is it that as a refugee, sometimes if I have a particular skill, people will not take it, but then they would take a different skill from a particular person. And that for me led me to get involved in the Global Refugee Youth Consultation. It was a consultation that took place between 2016 and 2015, and it took place in different parts of the world. With different young people, and for me that was the starting point. That for me was one of the things that propelled me, because with that I was able to engage with other young people from different parts of the world. I was able to learn new skills. At the same time, I was able to facilitate, and I think that in itself built my confidence. It built the need and the skills that I had. And sorry, I can see someone is saying my voice is not clear. I'll just hold this a bit higher. And I think it was a moment for me that made me realize I might be a refugee, but I still have something to offer. Because I think when you live in a community where you see how people are being treated, where you see how the experiences your parents have gone through, the experiences of your neighbor, it's very easy to really give up. It's very easy to just wake up one day and say you don't want to live anymore. But then at the same time, when you look at the opportunities that you've been able to get, you look at it and you know that with this opportunity, I'm going to use this opportunity not only for myself, but also for my community at the end of the day. Because I think as I was born in Nairobi. I've lived my entire life in Nairobi. I can't say that I've lived in Juba or lived in South Sudan, but I've lived in Nairobi. And sometimes people tend to think just because you've not lived in a particular country, you don't have the entire gravity. But at the end of the day, as a refugee, when you're born to a refugee parent, living life of a refugee, it doesn't change. People will look at you and not think about, well, you were born in Nairobi. That doesn't happen. They look at you and say, this is actually a refugee. So I think for me, that has been one of the key things, to really use the platform I have to look at how can I effectively use communication to pass across key messages. How can I use communication to bridge gaps between my local community and the international community? And I think in the aftermath of the Global Refugee Youth Consultation, some of the things that came out of it were the 7 core actions for refugee youth. And these core actions talked about the need to recognize the skills of youth refugees, the need to have youth-specific data, the need to really look at engagement of young people and not look at them as people who are just passive and people who cannot contribute. And some of the recommendations that were made during this particular consultation was that it's very important to have a body that works closely with UNHCR, advising them on the different programming they have around the different work they're doing with youth. And in 2017, the High Commissioner then established the Global Youth Advisory Council. And the work we do basically is really looking at, in terms of if it's the livelihood unit, how are you inclusive when it comes to refugee youth? Because I think for a long time, data around refugees have not been aggregated according to age, gender, or even diversity. So you find that youth for a long time were being grouped under women and children. And if you look at it in Nairobi itself, 54% of refugees are people between the ages of 0 to 17. These are young people. So if we can't really look at that particular percentage and say we're inclusive in our programming when these young people don't have any particular thing. So that for us, that was how the council was established, and the council then went ahead a step further now to advise UNHCR on the different works they're doing around livelihood, around protection, around the different units that they actually have. So we've worked at the global level, ensuring that we bridge the gap, ensuring that we bring the perspective of our community. Because at the end of the day, we might be refugees, we might be people who are getting these services, but then one thing I think is really important to remember is that we are we're refugees ourselves and we've experienced these particular problems. So for us, by having that, engaging in this particular council enabled us to have a system whereby we're able to bring the perspective of our community and also get the feedback from the global level to the local level, ensuring that there's a constant bridge, ensuring that no one is left behind, because that is one of the important things for us.
Thank you, Foni. No one should left behind. I really must say, listening to all of you, Joelle, Behati, and Foni, I feeling strongly urged to reflect myself as a refugee, and especially as a woman refugee coming from developing country, living in a developed country, is not easy. So there's no time. So you feel every step is difficult. As Joelle said, she wanted to be feel integrated, and as Bahati said, from her childhood she wanted to have a good education. It's so amazing. Like even in those countries where you are living and representing, in Kenya, Nairobi, Kamua, they are already those countries who are lack of facilitation and resources. And when you are refugee, it means the resources has been cut more. And when you are woman refugee, there's also lack of access to the opportunity. So it's really amazing. Thank you so much. It's so amazing listening to all of you, and I'm feeling so excited to part of this discussion. And that's why, because being myself involved in refugee-led organization, refugee-led initiative, I always feel my own experience being a refugee always help. Already the gap you are talking about, the importance to be involved in the policy discussion, importance to work as a partner with all the initiative or response which been planned, is be important to be there as a refugee, because of your experience is already, your knowledge is there, and you don't need to have further knowledge or to do some kinds of further consultation, because you have holding your own experience as lived experience of knowledge. So I really like to listen from all of you. It's not like you are there because you are only refugee, but I really want to understand this yourself as a being refugee is a added value. So how you feel, do you feel like it has been the value of your background as a refugee, the work you have been done or doing? So do you think how it helped you to do more advocacy on to advance all the procedure or development in your institution you are working with in your region? So I would like to start with Foni with you. Foni,
Thank you.
yes.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Anila, for that great question. I think one of the things the refugee experience has really influenced the work I do. Because I think if I can't entirely separate it from myself, it's part of my identity, it's part of how I do things, it's part of how I will do things in the later on years. Because I think one practical example I can give you is that as a displaced person, you have to rethink how you want to do things. Just as Bahati said, you have to rethink about how you want to approach a particular thing. It's also limiting in a way. But one of the things that I can highly say is that this particular experience has shaped who I am today. Because I don't think if I was not a refugee, I don't think I would be doing the work I'm doing right now, because it's shaped how I think, how I look at things, and also how I treat people. It's very easy for someone to just dismiss and say, you're just a refugee, why can I listen to you? You're just a refugee, why should I give you this particular platform? But I think one practical thing I've learned from this particular experience, it gives you the opportunity to look at things in a different view, look at it and take advantage of it. Because I think that's what all refugees who have opportunities do. You look at a particular opportunity and you take it and you use all your strength to make sure that you're the best of the best. Because at the end of the day, when you go outside to these particular different organizations who are also employing others, you find that they require you to have a particular skill. Others will not look at your refugee status and say, you're just a refugee, why should I employ you? Others will look at what do you have to offer. And I think this experience has shaped how I carry myself, how I portray myself, how I do the different works I'm doing. It's enabled me to look past this identity, because I think most of the young people, most of the refugees would look at themselves and say, I'm just a refugee, I cannot do this. But then if you don't have anyone to look up to who is actually a refugee and did not let that particular status put them down, it becomes easier to pull out your sisters, to pull out your brothers. And I think that for me has been one of the key things, that I cannot entirely separate my identity as a refugee from Foni, because that's me, it's my experience. I've just been uprooted, but that does not mean I cannot be grounded. I can still be very grounded. I can be grounded because there were opportunities available. I've taken advantage of these particular opportunities. What I just need to continue doing is making sure that others can also take advantage of these particular opportunities. So I think for me, that's one of the key things that I have learned throughout this particular engagement. This experience has really led me to look at things and have conversations with different stakeholders. These are like policy makers, these are states representatives, these are leaders from my home country, and really talk about the real issue, talk about what policies or what damages is being affected on us. And I think it's given me that courage, it's given me that enthusiasm, that zeal to really continue and speak about issues, to really speak about injustices, and also to emphasize on the fact that I may not be home, but I really want to go home. I am working on myself to become a better person, but I don't want to come back home and find that it's still the same old systems, it's still the same old things that are there. So it's given me that courage to move, not to move alone, but really to move along with other people, move around, making sure that in every 2 steps I make, I am able to look back and say, yes, there are also other young people, or there are also 2 other refugees who are behind me, pushing me forward, working with me, supporting me. So I think it's very hard to separate and say that the experience has not influenced the work I do as a professional or a communication officer. It's influenced every single aspect of it because it's made me learn quite a lot of things.
Thank you, Foni, for sharing. It's really, I totally agree with you. This passion becomes part of our blood, and whatever we do, it's like ongoing advocacy, and we don't even realize we are doing advocacy, but we always doing that. So, Behati, I would like to ask you the similar question. Your own experience, did you feel is a added value in your work?
Thank you, Anila. Well, a lot that Foni has said, I completely relate with. And the best way I can put it is that I know what it feels like. You know, every time I interact with refugees or with whoever for that matter in my nursing career, every time a patient comes to me, I can relate to them. I can relate to whatever situation they are going through. And being raised as a refugee, and I say this a lot, we don't get a lot of kindness coming our way. We don't get a lot of love coming our way. So, with this in mind, you grow up to reflect all that you had expected to receive. So I find myself going out of my way to show kindness to refugees in my work, to my coworkers in my job, to my patients as a nurse, and knowing what it feels like at UNHCR, I know what it feels like to be on the other side of the glass. I know what it feels like to sit in an interview and have someone else hold your future in their hands, you know? And that background and that knowledge puts me in a unique position in terms of how I view my work. And also, it puts me in a place to put myself in the shoes of the person I am working for. When I am following up on youth activities, when I'm running a project, when I'm sorting a particular issue in the community, I put myself in their shoes, you know, and I know how urgent whatever is being handled is. I know how important it is to the community, but I also get to see the process on the other side. And I have the opportunity to merge the two. And most of the time, you find there is a huge communication breakdown between NGOs working for refugees and the refugees themselves in the community. And this comes from the place where these two parties have totally different experiences. You know, it's very hard for someone in an office to see how oppressive a policy is if they have not been oppressed by that policy themselves. But as a person who comes from that background, and let's say we're speaking about, you know, access to documents to work, I can say, guys, I cannot work, you know, I need this. You know how hard it was for me to get here, you know, whatever documentation I needed, and you know how hard it was to get. Imagine someone having to go through all that all on them on their own. And so growing up, as Foni has said, you understand what is going on in the community and you have the burden, or I can say I felt the burden to change things. And you see, as even Joelle said, a lot of refugees cannot speak for themselves. And what fueled my need to get educated was a need to learn how to speak, to learn how to express the needs of those who cannot express it for themselves. And that passion and that burden is what has gotten me to this point. I've wanted to work for a humanitarian organization for the longest time, for 10 years, 15 years, as long as I can remember. And that was because I know a change need to be made. And there's no way I can do it if I cannot speak. There's no way I can do it if I'm not in a position to influence this change or to tell guys, you know what, this is not working. You don't understand it, but I do. It's not working, and we need to come up with a way to make it work for the better of everyone. And so I want to show the youth out there that it is possible, that they can dream and they can make these things change. They don't have to sit around and accept their lot if it's not working. So that's what fuels Foni. That's why she does what she does. That's what fuels Joelle when she gets those rejections and still keeps trying. And that's what fuels me. And that's the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahati. It's really remarkable, and I do, resemble with so many things. The burden, the value you learn how to give the value to opportunity is really important when you have this so much rejection and you keep continue the struggle. So, Joelle, would you like to share your own a reflection or experience, what you feel being a refugee, working with the refugee response in your area? You have to unmute yourself, Joelle. Can you unmute yourself? Can you listen? Can you hear me? Yes, okay.
I'm sorry, guys, I'm not able to hear you.
Okay, no worries. I can repeat my question. I just asked a question.
Okay, if you're able to hear me, I can just go ahead and answer the question.
Yes.
Right. Okay, I can't hear you, but I'll just answer the question. Thank you. On my side, what I can say, I think we are all related somehow. And listening to what Foni and Bahati just said, it's something that I feel like maybe I don't have so many things to add on that point, but we are all refugees and we have that strong connection between us, which makes us, more maybe in a position to understand each other in an easiest way. And on my side, maybe I can say the main value that I brought to the team I'm currently working with is my personal experience. I think that's where when I try to share with others and say, that's my experience. This is what refugees are facing. And people, people pay, they give you attention and they want to listen to what you're saying because it's something new to them. It's something that, it's make really more sense in what, you're talking about. And I think that's the main value that, the big value that I brought to my team. And at the same time, and you know that I'm based at the regional office where you can understand some colleagues might not have a full understanding of refugee situation as this varies from, from one place to another. And having time to share with them our realities and providing recommendation that I think might work in our context was one of the things that I brought on the table and tried to, to reflect something unique and something useful from their side. And we say that I still believe that in UNHCR, studies and reports and statistics are not enough for staff to, to really understand the situation of whom they serve. Because you as you can just know or agree with me, many publications might focus on specific issue or areas and leave others behind, which might be need to go together, to really reflect the reality of, the context and the refugee situation. And I also still believe that there is a big difference between, reading a report and hearing from the source. And it's very essential for, for those who are based for those who are not based at the field, especially UNHCR staff, to really, you know, have access to stories from the ground and try to, you know, because I think this is something that can help them in order to understand the reality, mainly when it comes to, you know, they have the power to influence with their decision the future of refugees. So I think it's really important for them also to have access to the original stories rather than relying on studies and publication and reports. Because for me, when I go through the reports, to be honest, it's something that have, you know, it gives just a part of what is going on, of the reality, but doesn't really give the whole figure, the whole view of what is happening. So I think it's really good for them to have access to those raw stories, to understand really what's going on, to be able to take the decision based on on facts, but not based on, you know, statistics, based on reports. And I think our experiences as refugees and being in UNHCR and other international organizations is something that gives them that occasion, that opportunity to maximize and to fulfill, you know, their requirements, because they're there to serve refugees, they're there to respond to refugees' needs. And then if they're not able to understand, to really understand what refugees need or what refugees are expecting from them, it will be very hard and complicated task for them to, you know, to deliver, because they're not in a position to give what people are expecting. So I think our experiences, it's one of the main thing that we all can be able to deliver, and also some of our background experiences and our focus education, I think is something that we can bring, you know, to those international organization and be able to contribute effectively to what they're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to the three of you for sharing all of your very personal experiences and the way that they can apply so directly to your work. I think we'd all love to hear a little bit more concretely about what that's looked like at specific instances of time, about the way that your insights have sort of informed the programming, policy, and advocacy decisions that have been made and that you've been behind. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time to do that, but I want to transition into some larger scale questions about how do these opportunities, how can these opportunities be made available to other refugees that are wanting to work with UNHCR or other INGOs? And it reflects closely a question that is asked in the chat by a member of UNHCR staff who says, "We are currently actively looking at new ways to involve refugees in our work. We want to build and expand on the UNV refugee program that Bahati is on, and we are piloting a new program for refugees to be recruited into international professional roles with UNHCR." So the question for the three of you is, from your perspective, what are the possibilities and support that is needed in order to avail more opportunities for refugees to be working with INGOs? We know that there aren't a whole lot of refugees that are in leadership positions at this time, let alone on staff contracts. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's needed to support that type of effort? Perhaps we can begin with you, Foni.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things we all have to be really aware of is the fact that with most of these programs or opportunities that come around, one of the things they will always look at is it's based on knowledge. And that's one thing we can never dispute. You look at a particular opportunity being advertised and it would ask that you have to have maybe a bachelor's degree or a particular kind of requirement. And the reality is, if you look at the refugee population, most of them don't have some of these qualifications. And I think one thing we need to really look at is when we're putting out this qualification, are we only basing it on knowledge, or is the experience also worth it? Because I think you can't create a position and ask for people with a bachelor's degree Well, the reality is it's only 3% of refugees who actually have access to tertiary education. So that means basically you're closing out others who've been doing a lot of volunteer experiences for over 10 years, for over 15 years, and they're being shut out because of that one thing that they don't have. The degree, the certificate, the diploma, they don't have that. So I think that's one thing that we really need to look into. Secondly, I think we need to create enabling environments. Enabling environments meaning that we need to recognize the skills that refugees have. Because if we don't recognize these particular skills they have, there's no way that this particular program will be created or a particular job opportunities would come and they would still be engaged. So I think that's one thing by enabling environment, really meaning that recognize their skills, create really a system whereby if we have online platforms that if you're looking for a particular position, for instance, let's say you're looking for someone who would act as an assistant to a protection officer, why not avail this online? Because I think there's some key things that people normally have when it comes to you acting as a protection officer. I know that there are very different programs that each particular organization has. For instance, UNHCR has this wonderful program, the e-learning platform. The platform itself has different, they have different programs that build the capacity of staff or people who are working with refugees. So I think that's also one thing that if you're creating this particular program, avail it to them so that they can also qualify to get to that particular position. Enabling environment, meaning that it's very important that we have these opportunities available. Because also at the end of the day, we can't say we've created a program for refugees, but then when you look at the data or you look at the percentage of people who are actually in this program, it's very few. So I think these are some of the things that really need to be looked at critically when we're talking about creating a program that is sustainable and also creating a program that is very inclusive, looking at how do we ensure that young women can also have access to these programs? How do we ensure that people with disability can also have access to these programs? So I think for me, these are the key things that I would really want to be looked at when creating these particular programs, looking at how enabling and the enabling environment, does it allow for a refugee to share the expertise? Do we consider their experiences? Do we ensure that these particular platforms is inclusive? So I think those would be the key things to look at when creating these programs. And I think in regards to what the impact of the work we've been doing, I think one of the best thing that I can actually be happy to really speak about is the fact that we were able to really feed into the global compact for refugee and ensuring that we bring the voices of the people in the community and really direct it into that particular document. I can say that's one of the major achievements we've been able to make. And I think if we continue including people from the local level in all these different levels, then we would make something much more great.
Thank you. Bahati, did you want to expand upon the points that Foni has brought up?
Oh, sure. And thank you, Foni, for the wonderful words. And I resonate a lot with them because I feel that now more than ever, the world has been forced to accept what refugees can offer. We have all been forced to accept that we're in this together. The pandemic is not discriminating whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you're disabled, whether you have a country, or whether you don't. It's touching on every part of what has been our normal. And when you speak about being able to recognize the skills that refugees have, being able to recognize what refugees have to offer, something personal that I have experienced is since this pandemic hit, I have had the privilege to lend a hand to our healthcare system by giving my time and taking care of patients in this time. But thinking back, when I began my clinical placement last year around October, And I was going through the process because it's under the government that, you know, after you finish your degree, you have to do a year in the hospital so that you get your practicing license. So when I was going through the procedures of having this set up, I remember we were requested to give a list of documents. And one of the requirements was a birth certificate. So we had a list of about 20 documents. Some are accessible to refugees, some are not. And luckily, I had some that other refugees could not access because I had gotten them way earlier while I was still in university. But there was no way I could get a birth certificate. And I remember when I was doing my high school examination, what the Department of Refugee Affairs gave us to stand in place of the birth certificate was a letter from them saying that we are refugees and, of course, we do not have birth certificates, right? So I report at the Ministry of Health offices and I have all my documents except the birth certificate. So this nice lady receives me and she asks, "Do you have all your documents? We're not taking the applications if they're not complete." And I say, "I have almost all the documents, but I do not have a birth certificate." Then she flat out tells me that she cannot accept it. And I asked to speak to the person in charge so that I can explain why I do not have the birth certificate. So I go to the boss and she asked me what's wrong, and I tell her I do not have a birth certificate. Like, "Where are you from?" I say, "I'm a refugee from Rwanda." "Okay, then don't you have a birth certificate from Rwanda?" Like, "No, I don't have." "Why don't you have one?" she asked. Then I had to sit down and tell her, "Well, suppose war broke out right now and you had to flee. Do you have time to go to your home and get the birth certificates for your children?" Then she said, "No, I don't have." Then I explained to her that's why I do not have the birth certificate and there's no way I can get one. And when I was in high school, this is what we used. And she said that cannot work. But for a moment, when I put her in my place, she kind of sat down and thought through it. And she saw, you know what? It does not make sense that you are required to get a birth certificate and cannot get another document to substitute that. So, short story is, she accepted my application without the birth certificate, but it took me having to gather the patience to go the extra mile and explain to her what it means to be a refugee and getting this documentation. What am I getting to? I am trying to explain this. As we try to open up opportunities for refugees, we need to acknowledge certain things and certain contexts that refugees come from. There are some things that you would expect. Let's say if you are offering a job opportunity, as Foni has said, there are some requirements you would want that a refugee would not have. So then what other what other option are you giving? What else can be offered in the place of that? A lot of times you see when policies are being made, there is a gap or it's just one way. There's no other way. There's no plan B or there's no plan C. It's only just one way, which makes refugees get lost in the middle of all that bureaucracy, all that protocol. And that's something that needs to be worked on. And this will come about with our advocacy from us and even from international NGOs within themselves, recognizing where refugees are coming from. Another thing that will be helpful, Foni had mentioned this, would be data. We need a lot of data that goes around the context of refugees. There are a lot of things that I know that you don't know, that these NGOs that are opening up these opportunities do not know. You would want to do a project targeting youth, opening up opportunities for youth, learning opportunities, but your approach of it ends up working against you or against, the end result that you would have wanted for that project. So we need a lot of intentional data that is specific around refugees, around youth, around refugee women, around disabled refugees. With that, we can be able to make informed decisions. We can be able to make programs from an informed angle. Thank you.
We've got a lot of questions coming in from the audience already, and some extraordinary positive feedback for all of you. We've got comments like, "You are all role models of resilience and humanity. Well done. What a group of rock stars. Thank you for sharing your skills, your perspectives, your talents." We've got comments like, "Thank you for these very moving accounts of the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. It completely transforms and questions the meaning of the category of refugee." So everyone is really recognizing how moving it is to hear these incredible stories of hard work, perseverance, and creating opportunities for yourselves and others. But I think there are also questions about that build on exactly what you were saying, Bahati, about how refugees can be supported that haven't necessarily had access to education. And so one of the questions I wanted to start with you, Joelle, given what you said about your experience in Kakuma, is how can education be made available to support all refugees to have the kind of opportunities that you've had? So Barbara Mercer-Moser asks, what advice would you give to people working on the design and implementation of education in emergency setting programs or higher education programs? What kind of suggestions would you have to have more inclusive education? And we also received a related question about what kind of support there can be. This question came from Rebecca Roberts, for those without access to formal education. And I think, Joelle, if possible, I'd like to start with you on this because of what you said about arriving in Kakuma age 20, facing a challenge to access education. What would you say for those people working on education programs? What can they do?
Well, thank you for the question. I think from my experience, one of the things that those who are delivering or supporting education as well as higher education is to consider, different group or dimension of people. Because you understand, like from my, my experience when I'm, based in Kakuma, for example, in a refugee setting, you understand that those who are, newcomers, they are more likely not to be considered when it comes to opportunity, only because, they don't know how and which way to take and how, what are the protocols. And most of the time, they're the ones who are, they have so many pains freshly from, all the troubles and difficulties that they went through, and finding themselves in a new place where things seems not to be, more supportive or not welcoming them. It's something that really hurts. And I remember that was one of the things that, discouraged me at first place and made me cry, day and night, because I felt like there was no one there for me, and there was no someone to understand, even have time to, to try to listen to what I'm feeling or what I would like to share with others. And they need, I think those who are providing education and higher education particularly, is to try to be a little bit flexible, as Bahati said, with some of the situation and the background that where we came from. Because you understand, if at first place, I couldn't, try to find ways to, to overcome some of the challenges like language barriers and even basic languages in camp settings, things are really different from, from urban refugees, because, everything seems to be a little bit mechanic, and you have to try your best. You will be told that there is an opportunity, go and apply, but you'll find out like the place where you have to go, it's almost like 3 kilometers away, and you have to go, you have to foot and come back. Maybe you don't have food, you don't, all those situations make people not to, to be qualified. And that's the reason why most of the time people just drop out of education and not focusing on education. Not just it's not because they're not qualified or because they don't have that's willingness of continuing with the education, but just because they're facing a lot of challenges. And I think it's also good, the second point, it's also good to try to involve in what they're doing, kind of trying to understand the situation, the really situation, the problem of that person, and that can be done through kind of following up with what can be that particular challenge that person might face, and make him or her not being able to be qualified. I think most of the time, people in my context, people are not, they're just disqualified without even being given a chance. Even within the camp, I understand maybe the slots might be, a little bit, it might be small and not allowing a big number of people to, to be enrolled in a certain program. But considering the background, it's something very important, because most of the time when when it comes to recruitment, they just look at people who are, somehow qualified. Apparently, you can talk in English, you can write English, but remember, there is someone who can speak English, can speak French and write French, but not being able to, to just express himself or herself, and just need a kind of, small support to be able to, to be qualified for the opportunity. So I think that is one of the things that those who provide education might consider, especially when it comes to camp settings, and also because the situation is really difficult, to be honest. The situation is really difficult, and just little thing can make you just drop out education and impress with other things in life. So I think, yeah, that's the response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Joelle. It's really important what you have shared. I'm just going through the question. Thank you so much for everyone, the audience who are with us and listening to us. And you are sharing so much good feedback and your suggestions. And I see the question from Alina Mora. She is asking about the hope, because as a refugee, you have to have the hope to keep going on, because as Foni said, it's really easy to give up. So what's your suggestion? What could be the message of hope for the refugee woman, especially because as Mataya, she also asked about, like, she share her own experience, like for all refugee women who are trying to get in the role as an internship or something. There are so many difficulties because of their documentation or education or lack of access to the information. So how you advise them, like how they can keep holding this hope, and how being a refugee woman living in these circumstances, how they keep going on, and what you suggest about this. Foni, I would like to start with you.
Thank you very much. Just to add, I'll quickly add one point onto what Joelle was saying around education. I think for the different practitioners who are working around education, two things you need to really consider. First of all is culture, because I think as much as we'd like a lot of young people to go into school, culture is still a barrier, especially for young girls. And then national systems. We might want people to go to school, but then the situation in the country they're living in is even worse. So how do we expect them to actually go to school? In regards to young women and also as refugees, where do we get hope from? I think it's very easy to lose hope, because today you know you have this. Tomorrow you wake up, you're not sure what you have. It's very easy for you to wake up one day and feel, to lose the will to live, to lose the courage to do anything. It's very easy to just give up. And I think one important thing in it, which has helped me, and I'm trying to share that with other young people in my community, whether they're young women or even young men, is really having time to sit down and just talk. Because I think it goes back to mental health. How effective are we providing the mental health support for young people, for refugees? To wake up one day and not be sure about what you will eat tomorrow, or where you will sleep or what you will do. It's a situation that I don't think any one of us who are on this particular call would want to experience. And I think COVID-19 has given us a glimpse of the realities that refugees have to live with every day. You can't move, first of all. You might have a passport, but you will not move. You're locked in. There's some things you can't access, and that's just a glimpse of it. So I think firstly, to give hope, we first have to understand what people are feeling. If we don't understand what people are feeling, there's no way we can give them hope. Secondly, working with refugees leaders or the refugees themselves is quite important. Why? They understand their community. We can have access to their community. It's easier if I was to go to a particular community right now. I'm currently working with a young lady who's been feeling very hopeless for quite a long time. And why she's feeling hopeless, she does not know what to do with her life. And she's gone for psychosocial counseling, but she still doesn't feel good. She still has questions, she still has concern, but because I am a refugee, I understand her experience. It's easier for her to talk to me and tell me, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking. So I think working with refugees in this particular, if you're talking with young people, why would you want to bring someone totally from a different place to come and impact the life of the refugees themselves, when we have refugees who understand these particular struggles and they can be role models? So I think that's one thing. We need to acknowledge the fact that within the community, we have refugee leaders who understand their community, refugee leaders who are working for their community. Until we get to the point where we will acknowledge that we have these particular leaders, then it's still going to be very hard to give hope to a community that you've not even acknowledged that they have young people, they have leaders who are doing particular things. So I think that's one thing that needs to be done. The last thing I think that is really important to consider when we're talking about education, let's ask them. Education in terms of non-formal or formal education. Because I think most of the time we come up with, we will have a particular training and it's on hairdressing or it's on making furniture and all that. And that's not what they want. The only way we can give someone hope is by sitting down, having a conversation with them, understanding who they are, understanding what their hopes are, and also understanding what they need. Because I think if we just make plans or come up with programs based on our understanding, then we're already making the community very hopeless, because every single time they'll feel like that it's very hard for someone to come and sit down and understand my need. They just make it they decide something for me and they expect me to do. So I think those are some of the things from my experiences. I think these are some of the things that need to be looked at. If we look at it, then we give hope. How do we give hope? We give hope by ensuring there's a platform to have conversation. And at the same time, there's a platform that refugees can be innovative and actualize the solutions they've come up with. Until we get to that point, people will still feel hopeless, and we'll just have a little number of people who are pushing, who are forging ahead. Thank you, Anila.
And thanks for those reflections, Foni. I think it sort of liaises into our final set of questions and comments from you all quite well. Unfortunately, we're very short on time, so we're going to have to close out with this round of reflections. And there are many questions that have gone unanswered. So just for the audience to know that the three panelists today, the three speakers, have invited their email to be shared, so you can be in contact if it's somehow constructive after the seminar. Also, I just want to mention as well, we were going to share a video from another refugee, stateless Palestinian that has been working with UNHCR in Lebanon for the past 5 years and is currently pursuing a master's and has taken leave from UNHCR. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for that, but I will share that in the email afterwards, in order that you can sort of get another testimony to sort of the great intellect and thoughtfulness that goes into the work that they do as refugees working on behalf of refugees. So to ask a final question for you all, I'm going to start with a comment from Edmund Page that has just come in. He says, "It is good to see refugees recruited into full-time roles more often, even though we need to see more of this. What steps are needed to ensure that refugees are not just recruited, but go on to take on increasing levels of leadership within organizations? And it speaks to a broader question that was posed by Patricia Hines. In your opinion, what do you think is the next step for this network? So between what Edmund and Patricia says, or what they ask, what can this By Refugees network, this group of 800 people that are here and have various levels of power, authority, influence within their networks, what can they do to support you, other refugees and displaced persons in your positions to really get refugees and those with lived experiences elevated to the positions that they should be in within these organizations? Bahati, if we can start with you and any other words that you'd like to share to close out. Thank you.
Thank you, Andonis, for this, and thank you to my fellow panelists for the encouraging words. What I would like to say is that what we can think about as next steps is how can we empower refugees? I see a lot of potential in refugee youth, in refugee women all over, yet their potential is very much unexploited. How can we strengthen their capacities? If we're thinking of education, those who are not able to get into the competitive formal education sector, what skills can they be imparted with? I am somewhat of a collector of skills because I know how important technical skills are, life skills are to your daily lives. I mean, if I cannot afford to buy things for my home, maybe I can make them for myself. And maybe I can make and sell to someone else. Then I am able to support myself. How can we lead refugees to this journey of self-reliance? And NGOs, the world right now is shifting towards refugees being able to support themselves, enabling this, facilitating this process. Because I always say this, refugees cannot be on foreign aid for forever. Our children will not go to school for free forever. We will not be given food for free forever. At some point, we will be expected to buy our own food. And a lot of this living on aid, it takes a lot of your power. It takes a lot of your self-esteem, knowing that you cannot support yourself. And this puts strain emotionally and mentally. So let's think of how we can empower refugees. Let's think of how we can strengthen them and lead them to the path of self-reliance. And maybe just to speak to any refugees who are out there who are tuning in and listening to us, I mean, it's so great that we have Foni here, we have Joelle here, and they're telling us countless times they were let down by the system, countless times they were disappointed. And you know what? We sit down, we cry, we wipe our tears, and we move on to the next challenge. Because you know what? You cannot go through life just giving up and just, accepting things if you know they're going to change. I grew up refusing to be second best. I swore to myself that I will not take crumbs and that I will work myself off. I will work the best I can to live up to my potential. And that's what you can do. Refugees, we are not broken. It just takes us a lot more time and a lot more effort to go through the trauma we have lived through, the trauma we've seen our parents live through, to rise above that and be what we were destined to be. Your scars are not a sign of weakness, but they are a sign that you are a survivor, that you have made it this far and you can make it even farther. Thank you.
Foni, I see you're unmuted. Would you like to share closing thoughts?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I think some of the next steps that I would like to see coming out from this. First of all, I think we have quite a lot of different people on the call. And with the COVID-19, what we've seen is that we've had a lot of refugees taking lead becoming very flexible to respond to the crisis that they're facing in their community. I think one next step I would like to see is that post COVID-19 is that when the different NGOs or UNHCR or different partners are coming back to the ground, you will come back to the ground and not work in a way you want to replace or take up the different activities these young people or refugees have already been establishing. That's one thing I think that needs to happen. Secondly, I think it's very important that as we move forward, we're able to look at how can we concretely support refugees. Because I think it's also a point for all of us at this particular call to do an internal vetting process and ask yourself questions. When I'm engaging with refugees, am I just engaging with them to a particular level whereby I just tell them, I want you to go and do this? Or am I actually acknowledging the innovative skills they have? That's number one. And then also looking at, as a particular entity, what is the data? How am I promoting refugee self-reliance? Because I think it's very easy to say, I want to promote refugee self-reliance, but then when you look internally, the work you're doing is not actually providing that. So that's the second thing I would want to see come out of this. And lastly, I think it's very clear for us as refugees, we understand that we've all been wounded. We all still have the resolve to continue helping our community. It will never change. But how do we also continue to work together? And I think that's one of the major important things I would call out to my brothers and sisters from a refugee background in this particular call. We need to support each other. We need to make sure that if you're quite a step ahead, how do you make sure that those particular ones who are still under you are also able to get to that particular level? Because I think we might say, we want you to do this, I want you to do this, but at the same time, what am I doing? Because I think it's a two-way, right? We're asking the different stakeholders, UNHCR, states, INGOs, NGOs to do this, but we also need to reflect internally and look at how am I ensuring that my community is able to rise above all these particular challenges. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be really exhausting. It will let you down a couple of times, but I think at the end of the day, we're doing this because we relate with it. We're doing this because of humanity. We're doing this because we want to make sure that in a couple of years, when we go back to our home, no one would look at us and say, you're just a refugee, but they would look at us and say, oh, Foni, you're a communication officer, can you do this for me? And no one would call you as, Foni, you're just this particular person, I want this from you. So I think that for me is one of the important things that moving forward, we're able to look past this identity and really look at the contributing skills, the contributing capacities that everyone has. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Foni. And from you, Joelle, if you'd like to have some closing thoughts before we turn to Anila and Alex to close out the session. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think from now, the next step that we can take or try to work on is, I believe what we have done and the level we are up to now is just the entry place where we are just trying to open doors and try to fight hard and make sure that those who are still behind can also reach this level and go furthermore. But I think we can also try to make sure that whatever we are doing, we still have a lot of work to do on ground and in our organization where we're working. And our work is to make sure that we can try to, to make those refugee organization to try to realize how much resources they're wasting in terms of human resource by not, recognize refugees' capacities and try to give them opportunities to work. And I think mainly is trying to advocate for more opportunities, because I think by having opportunities or trying, working with international organization and giving opportunity to meet other policymakers, because what we are facing as refugees and all the restrictions are not just coming from around. No, they just come from above, where we are not able to reach. And I think it's really important to reach that level where policies, came from. And we think, I think it's all up to us to try to figure out which way to use. And I think getting this opportunity, working with UNHCR and other organizations, it's a good start for us to start to figure out what will be the next step, and as well as preparing ourselves to what we have been told, being self-reliant. And we know that after all, we have to rely on ourselves, and we are looking ways to how really relying on ourselves, because you can't be told that you have to rely on yourself while there is some kind of policies and restriction that you are still facing. And I think those are the major challenges that we are confronting with every single day. And it's really important to think about that kind of particular figures and make sure that we also tackle that aspect and see what can come up from there. Yeah, that's my contribution on that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I like to say a last word from my side. First of all, I really like to say a thank you for all the audience who are there, with whom I can't see, but I can feel your sincere comments, your question, the passion you are showing through your sentence. It means a lot to us, especially being working by refugee-led network and living as a refugee, in a new country. It's not easy, but all the voices which heard today for Foni, from Joelle, and from Bahati, I always, it's not a voices, it's a strong example of role model. And we as a audience, as a partner, we can give a true visibility and to say that we do understand, we hear you, and we do understand you. So thank you so much, as it's really being an amazing experience working with Alexandra, with you, and Andonis, with you. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to us for Global Refugee-led Network to be part as a partner with you to hold this discussion. And we are here trying to make a good normal for which can work for everyone, and we can bring a new meaningful ways we can create for the next generation, and our hopes are really high. So thank you so much, and please feel free to reach out to me and reach out for us. And this is the thing, we really want to create new collaboration, new coordination among ourselves, and we want to work in solidarity towards this a structure and a lack of opportunity which been refugee been not given. And we like to be involved in advocacy and make a good future for all. Thank you so much.
And just to close, first of all, I want to say a massive thank you to Joelle, Bahati, and Foni for sharing your personal experiences, your ideas, your passion and commitment so generously with us. I think one of the messages I take from this is that you are success stories, that your hard work, your perseverance, your desire to make a contribution to support other refugees are really inspiring, but it hasn't come easily. You've faced huge obstacles and restrictions and barriers in the context in which you've lived. You've mentioned barriers to the right to work, barriers to access education, barriers to travel and mobility that many refugees face. And you've highlighted that there are lots of structural obstacles to meaningful refugee participation that we have to collectively overcome, working globally in order to enable more refugees to have the opportunities that you've worked so hard to achieve for yourselves and for others. So I think this has been a wonderful way to close with a great source of inspiration for many. Across all 6 of the seminars, we've touched on so many dimensions of what meaningful participation means. And I've learned a huge amount from that. I think from a Refugee Studies Centre perspective, we've learned a lot about better ways we can engage refugees meaningfully to participate in our research and our work and our conversations. We've touched upon issues like the work of the Global Refugee-Led Network. We've focused on cities, camps, the role of funders, international organizations, and this week on refugees working in international organizations. And collectively, I suppose the hope is that that can start a dialogue that can begin to bring practical change, that despite all of the really harsh realities of the current situation and the health and economic consequences of COVID-19, if there's a silver lining, it's that this moment of opportunity might allow us to create more participatory approaches within the refugee system and within the ways in which refugees can lead their lives individually and collectively. So I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Anila for co-moderating this, but also thank you to just a few other people. From amongst my RSC colleagues, Elia, Maddie, Annalise, Tamsin have been working very hard in the background on the technology, the communications, and of course, Andonis has done an immense amount of work with pre-calls, with preparing questions, with doing a lot of the structuring. And so I just want to say thank you to you for being a brilliant colleague and doing so much work for this series. And to the Global Refugee-Led Network, it's been an amazing partnership. It's been a great opportunity to learn from you in this series. And I hope this is just the start of the many ways in which we can continue to work together as organizations. And I'd invite everyone listening to reach out to the GRN and try to find ways to work actively with them and support them. And finally, to the audience at home, I think that the feedback you've had, the comments you've offered have shown real engagement. This hasn't been a one-way communication, it's been a real dialogue. So really grateful to everyone for your participation, for your engagement. And as Andonis said at the start, we want this to be the start, not the end, both of the conversation and the transformation of the way in which we support meaningful participation for refugees in all aspects of work that relates to refugees and displacement. So thank you very much to everyone. And I can stop and shut up now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Phil.